So hi, my name is Janie, and I'm a recovery coach at Claremont Recovery Center, and I've been in recovery since September 21st of 2014, so I have a little over 3 years clean. I'm in recovery from heroin addiction, and before that, many other chemicals. I started my addiction when I was about 13 and lived in addiction for almost 20 years, so I'm going to kind of start at the beginning, tell my story of the struggle in addiction, but the hopeful story of the road to recovery. So I grew up in northern Kentucky. I was an only child of a single mother, and which was kind of lonely sometimes, but I had a big family. I had a big extended family, lots of aunts and uncles and cousins and things like that. Very loving family, but a very dysfunctional family. I grew up around a lot of alcoholism, a lot of abuse, things like that, but it just seemed to be normal in our family. My very first memory as a child was of sexual abuse when I was probably 4 years old. And I only bring that up because I've healed from that also, but that had a lot to do with my decision making throughout my whole life, because my feelings attached to that first memory were fear and shame. And so when I look back later on in my recovery, I could see that all these decisions and all these bad points in my life were led by this fear and shame that I started off in. And that's what I remember as a child, was just living in this fear and shame. And I can actually even picture myself as that child and see the look of fear and shame on me. And I couldn't stand the way I felt. The way I felt in my own skin was just that fear and shame. And so I think I spent a lot of time miserable and not wanting to feel that anymore. And so when I would be around my aunts and uncles and watch them when everyone was drinking, and there were all these family gatherings where everybody was getting drunk, but what I would see when they were getting drunk, and even though it would end up in a big brawl and people fighting, what I saw in the beginning was people smiling and people being happy. And what I saw in that was freedom. They didn't feel what I was feeling. They had some freedom and they had some release. And so I was attracted to that from the beginning. I think I probably started smoking pot way before 13, just because my cousins were and I was a follower. I always wanted to fit in, I think because I felt so different. I think I was around 13 when I had my first drink. It tasted terrible, and it was hard to get it down, but once I got it down, I did have a release, and I did feel a little bit of freedom. And so I sought that out. And I think the first time I actually got drunk until I passed out and threw up, but all I could remember was that feeling of release and that feeling of freedom. And so that started my addiction. And so from 13 on, I was drinking every chance I could, including at school. I skipped school a lot. I was smoking pot and I was drinking, doing LSD. That was kind of big back then. Anything that was escape. I think I realized as I look back, I was always seeking escape, and I was always seeking just to be numb. And that was my life for a long time. I was a very rebellious teenager. I had a very loving mother, but she was very strict, and I think I rebelled against that a lot. And I know she had her hands full with me. I was not a fun daughter to have in any way, shape, or form. My mother loved me, and she always stood by me. And out of love, she sent me to my first treatment center when I was 16 years old. And the place doesn't exist anymore, but it was a very strict treatment center. It was fear-led, pretty much. And so I was there for 9 months, and I started off going, they used to have these 30-day care units, and I went to the 30-day care unit, but while I was there, I ran away from there once and got drunk. They found me, brought me back. Then another person came in. I smoked pot while I was in there, and so as they found these things out, they're like, okay, she has some problems we maybe can't deal with. So they sent me to this long-term treatment center. And like I said, it was fear-led, it truly was. And so when I left there, after 9 months, I was extremely neurotic. I was 17 when I left there, and I started to do some outside support group meetings, mostly because I was afraid and because I was so neurotic. And so I found a 12-step support meeting, and I kind of got connected, and I stayed sober for a little while. And I was so young, and I was terrified. I was afraid of life, pretty much. And I stayed sober for a while, and I did start to feel a little bit of freedom in that, but it didn't last, because the day I turned 21, I decided to start drinking again. And when I started drinking, I also was introduced to cocaine, and I started doing cocaine, and that's all I did. My life became a constant party. In between all that, I did do some good things. I got a college degree, and I usually would have a good job and I could keep it together somewhat. And then when I guess I was about 23, I met my first husband, who introduced me to OxyContin. And that was my first introduction to opiates. And so I started to do OxyContin. And the first time I did it, it made me sick. I didn't like it, but I continued to do it. I think one of the things that I found with my addiction was that even if I didn't like something, if it made me feel different, I would continue to try it just because it made me feel different and I didn't have to feel what I felt in my own skin. I got addicted to OxyContin pretty quick. And my addiction got so bad that at one point I did go to a methadone clinic. I heard the methadone clinic could help me, and I went to a methadone clinic. And so I was off and on a methadone for quite a while. And one of the times that I was off of methadone, my husband was no longer getting his OxyContin, and he introduced me to heroin and said, this is the same thing, it's cheaper, we can get it. And I did it, and it started the worst hell of my life. At first it was perfect because it was the escape I had always sought. All the other drugs gave me the escape, but the heroin gave me the complete numbness, the complete escape that I had always sought, and it became my comfort. It became my God. It became everything to me. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on war stories with my heroin addiction, because I think people can turn on their TV and they can see all the war stories and all the destruction that happens when you're on heroin. And I stayed on that path for almost 20 years. And I did I went to jail a lot. I went to a lot of treatment centers, a lot of detox centers. I had 2 children in between there. One of them was born addicted to methadone. That child is now 15 and is doing great, and that is only by the grace of God. But there was just a lot of destruction in my life. I would lie to everyone. I would steal to everyone. I was not a good person to be around. You couldn't trust me. If my mouth was moving, I was lying. And I didn't want to be that way. I don't think anybody ever wants to be that way. It's just this misery that we live in. And I think we get to a point, at least I did, that I was completely hopeless. And so it's hard to be motivated for anything when there's no hope. There's nothing to be motivated for, and that was kind of my life. My family was very dysfunctional, but I had a grandmother that was a Christian, had been since she was 15 years old. And at some point during my addiction, when I was in my 20s, my mother had started going to church, and she asked me to go with her. And I went with her, and I actually had a very short period of time where I could stay clean, and I started to feel better, but I didn't know how to hold on to that. I just kept running back to the drugs, and I bring up that part of my story because it matters later on. But my husband and I got divorced, and I met someone else, and I got into a relationship that was very abusive, which is not surprising because of the way I felt about myself. I didn't feel like I deserved much, and it was this very volatile relationship. And so I was living in this horrible addiction, completely miserable, in a violent relationship, and my life was falling apart. And my 2 children went to live with their dad where they would be safer. They were never taken from me, but I felt at the time I was no good. I didn't know how to make good choices, and I didn't have the ability to be a good parent. And so they went there, but what that did do was that gave me the freedom to just completely run and just completely destroy everything in my life. I could no longer hold a job, and things just got really bad. And I still drank through all of this and would still do any other drug you put in front of me. I sought complete escape. And, I talked about my grandmother being a Christian. I didn't know anything about that, but I did believe in God. But I got to this point in my addiction where I was so miserable that I prayed, but I started praying for death. I got this acceptance with my addiction that I was going to die in my addiction. I knew that was what was going to happen to me. And the strange thing was I didn't feel any emotion about that either way. It didn't make me sad or upset or anything else. It was just, it can't happen fast enough. Why is it taking so long? And so I started praying to die. And I always say, well, I wasn't suicidal. People always ask that question. And I would say, well, I was never suicidal. But I was praying to die. I think that's a little bit there. That's kind of where I was toward the end of my addiction. And like I said, I'd been in and out of jail several times, court-ordered to treatment. But what would happen was I would go to treatment. It's easy to stay clean when you're in treatment, but I still had the mental obsession constantly. And so anytime I would walk out the door of a treatment center or a jail, the first thing I did was get high because I never really did anything to deal with what was going on inside of me. The drugs were simply taken from me and my head was still screaming for it. And so I never really could find any victory, which left me even more hopeless. I found this treatment center, and it was a Christian treatment center. First time I had ever sought treatment myself without someone making me go, or to, get my mom off my back, or my husband off my back, whatever. It was the first time I sought it for myself, and it came from a letter from a friend of mine who was in pretty bad addiction, and they had sent a letter home and said that they were at this Christian treatment center, and that they saw hope for the first time in their life, and it really impacted me. And so I called this place, and I went there, and when I walked in the door, it was the first time I felt hope in a long time. I use the word hope a lot because when you're hopeless for so long, the first time I got a glimmer of hope, it was huge to me, and I grabbed onto that. And so I went into this place, and it was the first time I'd felt any hope. I don't know if I ever remember feeling hope before then, and I actually felt some peace, and some really good things happened there. However, I still had this battle going on in my head, and I still had my head screaming for that. And even though I tried to grab onto it, I would love to say I walked in there and that was the day I got clean and life has been great, but that's not what happened. But it's still an important part of my story because that was the first time I felt hope. So I went there, I stayed for 30 days, and I decided I got this. I can just drink. I'm over the heroin addiction, I can just drink. And so I left after 30 days, and I walked out the door, went straight to a bar, got drunk, and the next day, of course, I was getting high because there is no middle for me. If I'm going to put any chemical into my body, it's always going to lead to the ultimate escape, which was heroin for me. And so the next 2 years of my life got really miserable, and as I talk, I think, how could it have gotten more miserable? But it did, and it always can get more miserable. And that prayer for death was a constant thing. When I sought to be numb, I was numb. I didn't feel anything bad, but I didn't feel anything good either. There was absolutely no emotion, and I felt like I was just this walking shell. Like I was completely dead inside. I had no soul. That's how I felt, and that's how I walked through. I'd gotten into some trouble again, and I was on probation and, trying to cheat the system and, constantly lying, and I'm not doing drugs, and I'm clean and doing whatever I could to pass a drug test. And one day I went in and I failed and went back to jail. And the neat thing, I think it's neat now about when I went that time, I went and I turned myself in. And it was the first time I went to jail, and I just kind of thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm praying to die. That's not happening. My life is not getting better. Something has to change, and I don't know how to change it. I don't have the motivation to change it because I felt like I'd tried so many things before. But I went in with kind of this feeling, and I had this conversation with God that this is not where I want to go, but it's better than where I am. Something good has to come out of this, and I don't know what that is. And so while I was in there, the Christian treatment center that I'd gone to, the director of there came to see me while I was in jail, and she said, "Do you want to come back here?" And I said yes, and I'll be honest, even though I was having that something has to change and I want something to be different, I really went there because I didn't want to be in jail. It was the better alternative as opposed to being in jail. I was released to go there, and I went back there, and the first week was the same thing, me kind of thinking, I felt hope before, but, it's kind of hopeless. I'll just ride my time out here. It was my first week there, and we'd gone to this play. And I always bring this up because we'd gone to this play, and it was just a play, but it was at a church, and I cried through the entire play, and I knew that there was something in me that was ready to surrender, and that's where all those tears were coming from. And so afterwards, I kind of told God I completely surrender. In the past, I tried to do that, but it wasn't true surrender because it was like, take this addiction from me, but I'm going to hold on to everything else in my life that's negative. Just take this from me. And I surrendered everything, good, bad, and indifferent. Here I am, take it all, because there has to be something better. And my life really did start to change after that. And I actually really started to work for recovery. And to be honest, I don't know that I saw a good outcome. I just felt like I didn't have a choice but to try to do something different, and I worked so hard. And I'd gotten to the point when I talk about complete surrender, if you would have told me to lick your finger, it would keep me clean that day, I would have done it with no questions asked because I was willing to do anything. I brought up my first memory and that sexual abuse in the beginning because one of the neat things that happened while I was there was I was also going through counseling, and up until then, I never thought that that was ever an issue or drove anything in my life. And it was at that time that I was able to look back. I did a timeline, and I was able to look back and see how that drove most of my decisions because of those feelings that it had in me. And so as I was going through counseling and going through this program and working on my recovery, I kind of faced some of those things. And I had this moment where I felt healing from that. And I bring that up because I know not everyone goes through that, but I think there are a lot more than probably ever really talk about it. But in that healing, that's where my true recovery started. And I remember having this moment where I forgave the people that had abused me because I experienced forgiveness for the first time. And I was able to forgive myself. And I actually felt this forgiveness wash through my entire body. And I remember crying, and I remember running out to the director of this program with tears in my eyes saying, do you know that I'm forgiven? And this was all from God. And that's where it was coming from. And I had this healing. And you know, this journey and recovery has been the most amazing experience of my life. When I thought about surrender, I had no idea because I lived for so long thinking, I don't care if I'm ever happy again. I don't care if I ever smile again. I just want to be okay every once in a while. And I was blessed beyond that because I walk in total joy today. And I think it just came from dealing with some of the past hurts that I'd gone through, and it came with this complete surrender. I think we go through this thing in addiction where our lives are miserable, we want it to get better, but when those drugs are the only comfort we've ever known, we'll hold on to it with everything we have because as much as we want it taken away from us, when it's our only comfort, it's terrifying to let that go. But once I let go of it, I was blessed beyond belief. My husband was still in addiction when I got clean, and I spent 2 years with him still in addiction. And my husband is now clean because he watched me walk in recovery, and he watched my life get better. And when I say my life get better, he wasn't watching me gain material things or anything else. He was watching me smile for the first time and not have nightmares and laugh a real laugh, not a fake laugh, but a real belly gut laugh. And would ask me, like, what is going on? Like, how have you changed so much? And I was able to share that. And, you know, it took him a while, but finally he came to that same surrender I did. And it's kind of spread through my entire family. Even my ex-husband has recently gotten into recovery and is doing great. My children are back with me. I work full time trying to spread hope to other people because one of my favorite things to do is work with someone that has no hope, because I was one of those people that everyone looked at and said, give up on her. She's tried everything everybody's tried. She is hopeless. You know, and I think about the argument out there about Narcan and about saving people's lives, and I promise you I was one of those people that somebody would have said, just let her go. She's never going to make a good decision. Just let her die. She's going to be better off. And anytime someone is still breathing, there is still hope in their life, because I was at the bottom of the barrel, and that is my favorite person to work with, the one that everyone else has given up on. There's so many things that I could talk about in recovery that are so good, and I've been healed of so many things that sometimes I actually get stuck because I'm like, where do I start with all these good things that have happened? My life is complete and it's full. It doesn't mean it's roses every day. One of the things that I found out is I'm a runner. That's what my whole past was about. Anytime something was hard, I turned around and ran the other way. So I was never able to see the reward that you could get for going through something hard because I never tried it. So when a struggle or something comes my way today, I've learned the coping skills and the tools to be able to walk through it and get through the other side. And see the reward that you can truly get from walking through something hard and having some faith. And I love to be able to share that. I love to share a true smile, and I love to have the experience of working with someone else and see the light in their eyes for the first time. Because I see so many people that when I look in their eyes, I see exactly what I used to feel. And I know that there's a possibility other than that, that someone can have some hope and that they can have some light. And I said that hope is my favorite word, but truly it started with hope, but now it's freedom. I love freedom because I feel like I walk in freedom. I wake up every day. My first miracle was the first day I woke up and my first thought wasn't, how am I going to stay well today? How am I going to survive today? But I go out about my day. I walk different. I talk different. I think sometimes you can look at me, I'm annoyingly joyful now. I drive people crazy with this happiness. And all this hope that I want to share. But I think it's very important to share what I came from so people know that's not what I always had, but it's possible to go from that hopeless state to having this joy and having this freedom. And I want to be that light for somebody else. Again, there are so many things I could say about recovery, and I love the support network that I have around me. I have this great network of people, and mostly women, which is odd because, you know, I was one of those girls, and I don't think I'm unique, that hung out with all guys and didn't like women. They'll stab you in the back, and I have this great network of women that hold me up and hold me accountable and love me when I don't know how to love myself, and that's kind of what helped me to get here. And anytime I go through a struggle now, I have that support, and I have those women to kind of hold me up, and that's been a major blessing in my life. I don't know, I feel like there's so much more I can share, but that is my story, and I love to share my story, and I love to share some hope with people, so thank you.